Hello and welcome to the second video for Wavy Maths Fractions. And in this video, we're going to be doing equivalent fractions and simplest form. So just before that, just give you one other example of why we have fractions in the world. So there's this coronavirus going around the world. And if we wanted to compare different countries to find out where the virus had been most prevalent, we would need to it wouldn't be fair to just look at the absolute numbers, because China has a much bigger population than the United States of America, and the United States of America has a much bigger population than Britain and France and countries like that. So what we really need to do is look at the amount of people who have the virus as a fraction of the total population in order to make it a fair comparison. So that's just one example of fractions in use. So equivalent fractions. So we're going to look at cakes. So imagine if we split up our cake into we're going to eat a quarter of this cake. So that would be 4 pieces. So that would be 1 quarter. Okay, put it up there actually. Simple. Right, the question is there any other way of having the same amount of cake but cutting it up in a different way? Instead of cutting it just into 4 pieces? The answer is yes. What we could do is we could cut it up into 4 pieces and then cut them further up into 8 pieces. So cut each piece up in half again. So this time we've got eighths. So the first time we had a quarter, this time we're going to have eighths. Now, how many pieces of cake do we need to eat now to make it the same? We need to eat 2 pieces. So 2 eighths is the same as 1 quarter. They're equivalent. So we sometimes use 3 lines instead of 2 to show equivalent, but it means the same, very similar to equals, so I wouldn't worry about it. Now, why do we need to eat twice as many cakes? Because we don't want to keep drawing the diagram. It would be good to just have a rule of how to find equivalent fractions. Well, if you think about it for a minute, the reason we had to eat 2 pieces the second time is because in the second one we had each piece was half the size. Because we cut it up into 8 pieces, it makes each piece, we've doubled the number of pieces, so the size of each piece has become twice as small. So we need to eat twice as many. So on the denominator, on the bottom, that has been multiplied by 2. Okay, so that's made we have to have twice as many pieces, but we now need to eat twice as many pieces as well, so that we have the same proportion. We've eaten the same proportion. And of course you can go backwards as well. So if you go backwards, you would be dividing by 2. So if you started thinking of 2 eighths of cake and thought, well, how could I do it simpler? You could just say, well, you could just cut it up into 4 and just eat one of them. So if you go back, you would have to divide by 2. And that's where this rule comes that you might have heard before, that with fractions, the golden rule of fractions, and especially equivalent fractions, is whatever you actually, you can express it like this. The golden rule in one sentence: you must multiply or divide both the numerator and the denominator by the same number. If you do that, then the fractions will be equivalent. So that's how you can check if fractions are equivalent as well, is you can see, can I multiply both the top and the bottom by the same number to make the new fraction? And if I can, it means they're equivalent. Just to show you, we can go further. We can cut the cake up into 4 pieces, and we can half each piece again. So we've got 8 pieces. Sorry, each piece is supposed to be the same size, so it doesn't really help when it's not. But then what we can do is we can half each piece yet again. So now we've got 16 pieces of cake. All right. And how many are we going to need to eat now to make it still a quarter? Well, we've doubled the number of pieces again, so we're going to need to double the number of pieces we eat. So that's going to become 4. So 1/4 is the same as 2/8, which is also the same as 4/16. It's the same amount of cake. Now, simplest form. Well, which of these examples here do you think are the most? Are the simplest? The simplest is the first one, isn't it? 1/4. Yeah. So the simplest form basically means the fraction with the lowest numbers that's equivalent to the others. So if I gave you an example, if I said find the simplest form of 6/8 of cake, then what you would do is you'd need to divide it. Okay, you think what can I divide the numerator and the denominator by? What number is a factor of both of them? And the answer is not always, but quite often 2. 2 works here. So we get 3/4. So 6/8 of cake is the same as 3/4. And again, you could see very quickly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6/8 of cakes. It's the same as 3/4. There's your 3/4. Now, another example would be, let's give it another example, more realistic example. You might get something a bit more complicated, like 24 out of 90. So let's say, and again, the reason why do you want to have the simplest form? If you did a survey, let's say if your boss asked you to survey the employees in your company, and let's say that you have 90 people working at your company, and your boss has asked you to ask all 90 of them what do they think of the canteen. Just give you an example. And let's say the canteen's rubbish, and so basically people have only 24 people like the canteen. If you said to your boss 24 out of 90 like the canteen, he can tell it's not, or she, sorry, can tell it's not a high number. You can tell it's not very popular, but it's a lot simpler if you can simplify the fraction down so that the boss can understand very quickly exactly what proportion. So we simplify it. So again, what we're going to divide this by? We're going to divide this by, we could always start with 2, okay? Or you could be clever and you could divide by 3, for example. So if you divide by 3, you get 8, and 90 divided by 3, you get 30. All right. But if you do that, you also need to then check 8 and 30. Can I divide them anymore? And actually, you can divide 8 by 2, and you can divide 30 by 2. So that gets you 15 on the bottom and 4 on the top. So 4/15 is the simplest form because you can't divide 4 and 15 by any number. There's no common factor. So the simplest form of the fraction 24 over 90 is 4/15, or 4/15. And so again, if you were to say to your boss, for every 15 people at work here, only 4 of them like the canteen, that's easier for him to understand because it's an easier number for him or her to grapple with in their head. Now, is there a quicker way you could have done this? Some of you might have spotted. You've got 24 over 90. If you divide by 3, what we did, we divided by 3 and then we divided by 2. What you could have done, if you're really good with your times tables, you can just divide them by 6 in one go. And that gets you the answer straight away, 4/15. So look out for that. If in doubt, try and divide by 2 and 3, but then you always have to double check the next one to see if you can't divide it again. Okay, so thanks for that. That's the end of that video.